Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our Masterful Leadership webinar. I'm Annette Brady, and I will serve as your host today. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our Masterful Leadership Specialist, Brent Borgenvog. And he's an experienced facilitator, program designer, professional coach, and human resource development specialist. He has 15 years of experience working with senior and emerging leaders in a variety of industries. In his professional practice, Brent works with leaders to help them maximize their personal and professional development in the areas of interpersonal effectiveness, developing additional leadership capacity, corporate strategic planning, and personal goal development and achievement. For the past decade, Brent has focused on designing and facilitating learning and development programs and courses anchored in emotional intelligence and behavioral-based competency models. He is a recognized leader in developing IT professionals and is certified and skilled in several assessment processes that help leaders better understand themselves, including DISC and Facet 5. Before we get started, we want to let you know that if you have any questions, please type them in the question box on the side of your screen. We'll take a pause at 12:15 to answer some of them. We have allotted 30 minutes for this webinar, so if there are additional questions and you would like to stick around afterward, we will be happy to answer as many as possible. On that note, the floor is yours, Brent.
Thanks, Annette, and welcome everybody. Talk about our topic today, Masterful Leadership. It's a topic that I think is really important, and I think also especially important for people in IT roles. So let's get into it. I wanted to start off with this, and if you look at the title at the top, it says IT versus leadership. And I started off with that on purpose because I think when you think historically, and when I think back at my IT career, so years ago, before I started doing development and training and coaching with leaders and other people, I worked in an IT department before it was called IT. And at the time, there was very little opportunity for IT people to advance into leadership roles. People didn't even really think about it. And it was almost like, IT versus leadership. You had to be one or the other. And I think today that's changed a lot. It's when I look at the IT business now, and I look at my clients, and I look at what's happening in the world, I think there's a lot of opportunity around IT and leadership. And I'm hoping that's why you guys are here today. So when you start to look at the idea of leadership roles have always existed. And so even though they might not have been formal roles or they might have seemed kind of boring, leadership always exists. And it's a little bit different than, say, for example, a manager's role, where a manager is, geared to making sure the processes are followed and making sure that, I think of it like this, is sort of like the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. But leadership always exists. And so now I think, especially with what's happening in IT, we're evolving past what it used to be. So when you look at IT's role, historically, it was more around automating things, capturing and identifying important transactions. So, drawing attention to things that were maybe out of the ordinary or people needed to pay attention to. And it sort of then moved along and started, giving us more information for business decision makers, for the CEO or the CFO or other managers. And so we've slowly seen this progression from basically capturing and managing transactions to giving us some information around which we can make decisions. And what we see now is that IT is starting to play a really important role in how businesses differentiate themselves in the marketplace. And so we're seeing things like, how does our business intelligence, how does our ability to gather information, how does our ability to analyze it, how does our ability to bring a new product to market, to innovate, differentiate us from a business? And if you look at the role of IT is now driving a really big part of that. And I think in the future, and probably even starting now, but more in the future especially, IT is going to play an even bigger role in business as when you start to look at artificial intelligence and the need for innovation. These things are driving a huge amount of change in business. And that's why there's an opportunity for leadership that's going to be coming up. AI and innovation and all the things that are happening in IT right now are going to set the stage for IT leaders to emerge and provide a significant contribution. So there are new roles, and leadership is evolving. I think back, even 15 years ago. 15 years ago, there was probably no CIO of an organization. There were no roles at the, in the C-suite executive that dealt with IT, and now it's really an important role in an organization. So we start to look at what's happening with companies, and we start to look at what the future says. We have to look at when do we need leaders? When is leadership important, and when is it something that we need to pay attention to? So there's a couple of conditions. The first is when you have business, when you have industry, when you have a situation where there's a lot of change. When I think about change, we have here on the slide high rate and pace of change. But when I think about change, I think about it like this. The more that change is involved, the more you have a need for leadership. When change is not happening so much, it's more about managing the situation. But right now we're faced with an unprecedented amount of change in different businesses, and it's happening faster and faster and faster. Another condition where we're going to need leaders and where leadership is needed is when you work in organizations with a lot of complexity. So right now, even when you start to look at how an organization structure plays out, you have dotted line people reporting here, there, everywhere. Sometimes the person you spend most of your time with isn't your direct boss. And if you are even in a leadership role, sometimes the people you're leading don't report directly to you. They might not even be in the same continent as you. A lot of my clients are dealing with situations where, they're leading a team remotely. That team could be in another country, could be in another state. So it's very complicated in terms of managing people, and this is where we really need leaders who can step up and achieve the goals of leadership. The other thing is when you start to look at industry and you look at business, when there's a lot of competition, and we're seeing that right now, the idea that, so how do I differentiate my business? Every business leader is looking at this idea. How do I make myself different from the competition? How do I provide something that somebody else doesn't? Leadership plays a big role in terms of fostering innovation, fostering creativity, handling the challenges of differentiating a business. And ultimately, when you start to look at what's going on right now, we see that business transformation is on the horizon. And again, that's when we start talking about leadership and the need for leadership. So the conditions are there. The people are there. Now we need to look at sort of what do we have to accomplish as a leader and what do we start with. So if you're thinking about a leadership role, or you're even thinking about yourself in an existing leadership role, then a couple of things start to become really important. In the context of what I was talking about before, you really have, and this hasn't changed, you really have constantly 3 objectives that you need to achieve as a leader. The first objective is to get the job done, to achieve the task. And you'll find that depending on your role in the organization, this is probably, job 1, and it starts to become more important as your span of control of leadership evolves and gets bigger. But achieving the task has different strategic levels. So you think about it, when I think about leadership, I think of different strategic levels, and this is going to play a role in something I'm going to talk about in a minute. But you think about the basic, okay, get the job done. But now a more strategic level of that starts to be get that job across a group of people that are unrelated. I have no organizational control over them. Now I need to get the job done, but this job at a more strategic level is something that people don't even see coming. It's something that we're going to have to do to differentiate our business. So depending on your role in the organization, you're going to start off at the basic level of getting the job done. But as you advance in your leadership role, it starts to look at, so what's the next thing that we need to be looking at? Where's the next task that we need to be doing? And achieving the task also needs to be done with an understanding of the business itself. How do we as a business deliver on our value proposition to our clients, and how do we, especially in the IT department, deliver on what we're supposed to be doing to get the business to move forward. So understanding the business starts to become really important from leadership. So it's not just, it looks like, achieve the task here. It's not just get the job done. It's like working through other people, getting the job done at an immediate level and up through a strategic level. The next objective, or the next thing that's really important for leaders to keep in mind, is how do they develop other people? And I think this is where it gets a little bit confusing for people, because sometimes it's thinking, okay, I'm just a leader, I got to get the job done. But you also have another aspect that you need to be thinking about, and that is, how do I develop others? So how do I understand my group? So this means I need to understand group dynamics. I need to understand influencing skills. I need to understand sort of what's going to do something that challenges my group to advance their skill set. What is their potential? This also speaks, if you think of another layer, another key relationship. So leaders are about relationships, and leaders use relationships in very important ways. So if you think about yourself at the top, achieve the task, you're achieving the task through other people, but you also have to develop relationships with the group, and you also have to develop relationships with the individual. So people follow leaders who give them opportunity to advance, who feel that they develop them. It's not so much about caring, although some leaders will take that stance that I need to care about the people that I'm leading, but it's more around, how do I help them achieve their potential? How do I help them advance? And if you think about yourself as a contributor on a team, one of the things that you're doing is you're giving your time, your energy, your effort, your knowledge, but you want something back in return. So I often think about this developing the individual and developing the group as the what's in it for me, question. And so a good leader is somebody who's going to have an answer to that and finds ways for people to get their individual needs. Now within that, if you think about that, it's a really simple diagram. It was designed by a Professor Adair in the 1970s. If you look at new leadership books right now, they may call it different things, but basically it distills down to these three separate balloons, or three separate objectives: achieving the task, developing the group, developing the individual. As you start to advance in your leadership career, and you've probably, maybe even if you're in your first role or second role, you're probably really good at achieving the task. That's why a lot of people get into their leadership roles. The biggest challenge, and especially for IT people, starts to be, how do I develop a group, and how do I develop the individual? Those are some skills that the IT role doesn't often prepare us for, and there are things that we need to think about developing and how we're going to go about developing that. So I'm just going to pause for a second, because we're just coming up to 15 minutes past 12, and I know we promised to answer some questions. So Annette, do we have any questions?
Perfect. We do. So what are some ways I can build my skills as a leader, even if I don't have a formal position as a leader?
Oh, that's a good question. A lot of people find that it's challenging to build skills when they don't have the role. So the company hasn't said, okay, you're a leader, you're a manager, you're a supervisor, you're this. But there are lots of other opportunities. You can do it by taking on special assignments at work. So you can volunteer, maybe help to work on an ad hoc project. Other people that I've worked with have developed their skills by working in community groups. So they sometimes go out and volunteer in a community group. And I will say one thing: community groups are a great way to develop your leadership skills, because you have absolutely no direct organizational control over those people. And you have to, and if you don't show good leadership, you're definitely going to have trouble leading, and you're not going to have people who want to follow you. So the other thing would be, look around at your workplace and see, are there other opportunities to contribute in sort of informal ways, organizing things like maybe social events or particular things that are happening in the organization. Put your hand up and volunteer.
Great. How can I get my boss to recognize my leadership potential?
That's a good one. Well, so one thing is to start to look at your, where you work and see, are there opportunities for you to demonstrate that. The second is to sit down and think about, and so one of the things we do in the class, and when we teach the Masterful Leadership and Motivation class, as well as the Leadership Boot Camp, one of the things we do is we sit down and we get people to think about what's their development plan. So what are the things that they want to accomplish as a leader? What are the experiences that they need to have as a leader? And we get them to sort of complete a development plan that they can then sit down with their manager and say, this is what I'm interested in. I find a lot of times managers don't know necessarily that people are interested in a leadership role unless they're told. And then sitting down with your manager and saying, I'm interested in this. What are the opportunities available to me? I've thought about where I am relative to leadership. Here's a sense of my skills. Here are the things that I think I need to develop. Here are the opportunities that I need to have put in front of me. How can we make this happen? I find that most managers are very welcome to that, or they're welcoming of that conversation, rather than just sitting down and saying, well, why aren't I a leader? So it's being a bit proactive and saying, I'm interested in a leadership role. Here's the thing that I think I bring to it. Here are the areas I want to develop. And here are the experiences I'd like to have the opportunity to try so that I can test my leadership abilities and skills.
So let me just take this one more question, because it kind of relates to that, possibly, depending upon who your boss is, who you are. Do you find that certain generations see the leadership role as a different one than other generations, i.e. like styles, approaches?
Yeah. One of the things so when you start to look at achieving the task, right, you also have to look at sort of what is the best way that I as a leader need to go about doing that. And so modern leadership theory is around situational leadership. And that means that a leader needs to understand themselves, they need to understand the group, they need to understand the individual, and they need to understand what's going to happen or needs to get happening as the task. Older people who maybe have a certain view of leadership that was sort of brought up in maybe an older view, sort of more hierarchical, sometimes look at leadership as, okay, I'm the boss, I'm in control, I do this. And younger generations have looked at it a little bit differently. Leadership rests oftentimes with who's got the experience and knowledge, and also the concept of how do I lead sort of maybe as part of the group, or maybe even lead from behind. So what I find is like younger leaders are more open to that idea. I also find, like working with emerging leaders, which is like an area that I absolutely love, is that when I'm working with emerging leaders, they're often a lot more focused on those two, the blue and the green bubbles there. They're often, that's kind of go-to. They're very much on board about developing the individual, developing the group, whereas older leaders sometimes look at achieving the task as more, okay, that's my role. I'm not so much about developing individuals or groups. I also find that younger people are more collaborative. So I think the school system and the way that people sort of get into the workforce is a little bit different. So they tend to be a little bit more collaborative in terms of approaching. The challenge that I find is that with the younger generation versus the older generation, there's less comfort dealing face to face with people. And I really encourage leaders to be present as much as possible. So while it might help you from a communications perspective to be familiar with how you communicate through messenger or whatever intermediated communication, younger generations much easier to do that, communicating like that. But there's sometimes the reluctance to step up and have those face-to-face communication or face-to-face meetings with people when that's really important. So there's a lot of little differences, but I wouldn't say one is better or worse than the other, because I don't believe that that's true. I just think that people look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, great. I'm going to let you go ahead and get back to your presentation. Those were great questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So what makes a good leader? I guess you're wondering, okay, maybe think about yourself and maybe you can assess yourself here. So good leaders have a couple of qualities attached with them. They're things that they're constantly seeking to develop. They're constantly seeking to improve on. The first is good leaders typically have good emotional intelligence. And that means you know your own emotions, you're able to manage yourself, you understand how you affect people. And keep in mind, right, like when you're thinking about emotional intelligence, when you're in the role of a leader, everything you do is amplified in the views of other people. So if you're an individual contributor and you don't go to a meeting, or you say something without thinking, people kind of go, oh yeah, whatever. But if you do that as a leader, that can have incredible repercussions for other people. So they're reading into things, they're amplifying it, they're magnifying it. So good leaders have good emotional intelligence. And that second point is they're able to build and maintain those complex relationships, both with individuals and the group at large. Another thing I find is good leaders give other people, they give their work meaning and purpose. So your role as a leader, and this is oftentimes like when you get discovered as a leader, a lot of times it's because you've been doing this on the side. You've been helping people understand what they have to do. Maybe you've been recognizing them, and you're understanding and you're helping people. You're really giving people meaning and purpose, and that's a very, very important role and makes a good IT leader. The next is that you're able to see and communicate really strategic ideas, but you're able to do it in a way that people who are very tangible, who want facts and data and information, they can understand it in the immediate context. So that really takes a special skill. How do I translate what we're doing overall as an organization down to the project level? And a lot of times that communication role, when you talk about leadership, you'll see it, communication is really, really essential. Even expanding on that communication mandate from the perspective of how do I actually work to balance the needs of the business with how we run IT? And so in a sense, you're almost like this, this translator, but it's more than a translator. It's like a buffer. It's like a lot of different things because you're between the business and IT. You're trying to work in the world of IT, but you're also trying to bring the meaning and importance to the business objective. So it's a very complicated role in terms of communication. Another thing is that good IT leaders and good leaders in general, they make decisions and they move on. So they're not worried about making the best decision. They're more about worried about making the decision and getting the job done and moving forward. Typically, we want people who are collaborative. So I call that the plays well with others aspect. This is something we learned in school, but it's really important that you understand the key relationships that you need to manage. And that includes across, so your peers, up with your boss, and down with the people that that are reporting to you or that you're leading. I also find it's really important that there's a sense of, okay, we can do this. So there's a sense of optimism. And this is especially important when we're talking about innovation and creativity because there's a high level or opportunity for failure. So if you are that kind of person who can sort of, okay, we can do this, we're going to get it done, don't worry about it, we'll fix it and move forward, you're going to be the person that's able to foster innovation and creativity. And we know that that's a huge demand on the IT leadership role these days, is people want innovation, they want creativity, and that doesn't come without failure. Has a degree of integrity, so they can be respected, they're looked up to. It's a very, very important thing we see today. There's a very high value placed on authentic leadership and true leadership and people who are leaders, but they're also human. Leaders used to be looked at as kind of a god almost, but now we look at them as they're human, they can make mistakes, and so we want to relate to them. We want to connect with them. That's probably going back, Annette, to Annette's question about like what's different between maybe the older generation and younger generation. There's more desire to relate on a personal level to the value set of the leader. Do I feel that that's sort of what I'm getting recognized for? Also, when we look at good leaders, you invest in yourself. You set your own goals, and you motivate others. And so that's coming a little bit about giving others work, meaning, and purpose, but it's also you're able to set goals and then drive towards getting them. And then lastly, you invest in your own development. So you take time to develop not just your technical skills, but your leadership skills. So if we look at about advancing into a leadership role, what does this mean? How do I do this? What do I need to focus on? The first thing, and I think this is one of the big challenges with IT people, is that we get our skill, our recognition, our value from our technical skills, our ability to get things done, and we sometimes don't think about how important those relationships. I cannot stress enough how important it is to build relationships and be seen to be able to build relationships. That includes managing your boss, managing your peers, your peer group, your same level colleagues, and then managing those that are reporting to you and that you're leading. Making decisions quickly, very, very important. I put this here specifically because a lot of the personality types that we see in IT often take time to make decisions, and that's often the one thing that holds them back. You may even have been told, go with your gut, work more about making quicker decisions. Focus on critical experiences, and this is a really important thing to keep in your mind. Think about what are the things that I need to acquire. So if you do a development plan, for example, a critical experience is, okay, I lead a group of people, it's 4 people. I lead a group of 20 people, that's another critical experience. I lead a group of 20 people, but 10 people report to me and 10 people report to somebody else. That's another critical experience. I lead a group of 20 people, but 5 report to me, 5 report to the business, 5 are working outside, and 5 are from another part of the business. Another critical experience that are going to go into your tool belt or toolkit. Learn to rely less on your technical skill and more on your people skills, specifically in communication and influence skills, super important. And then look at practicing and building a strategic view. Part of that is also by being a student of the industry, sort of understanding what you're trying to accomplish and where the industry is going and bringing that to your role as a leader. The last thing I want to leave you with is this idea. So this is what I start. When I start working with leaders, we actually start with this. I'm ending with it because I want you to think about it and think about your own development. But think about your legacy. We often start with the idea of leadership legacy. What do you want to be thought of as a leader? What do you want to accomplish? Good leaders play really important roles in the lives of others. And I think that's a really big motivator for why people want to move into a leadership role. You can make an enormous difference in somebody else's life. Think about your own leadership legacy. The thing about your leadership legacy, if you're in a leadership role right now, it's being written whether you know it or not. So why not make it the best legacy that you can? Anyways, I just see that my time is coming to an end here. If there's any more questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I want to thank you for being here today. I hope I've encouraged you to think about advancing your leadership career. We got some courses coming up that you might be interested. And so I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to hand it over to Annette to bring us to a close.
Thank you so very much, Brent. I want to just remind everybody that we'll be sending out a recording of this. As Brent said, we have these other leadership courses that are on the screen ahead of you if you want to delve deeper. We also invite you to visit our resource tab at protechtraining.com. And there you can register for any of our upcoming webinars, review past webinar recordings, or to locate some great articles on a variety of relevant topics. So we just want to thank Brent again for an excellent presentation, and to all of you for your time and attention today. So look for a follow-up email with the recording, and we hope to see you next time. Have a great day, everyone.